Well, good morning, good morning, good morning. Barry Jones, SP History, continuing with our series on the formation of the deep state. Yesterday in chapter 5, we learned through the use of the media and propaganda and through the use of the government and false flags, the United States, these power elites have succeeded in betraying the American people into a foreign war. And of course, that is by definition treason. So we have crossed the Rubicon now. And today, what we're going to look at is the American people's response to this new ideology. Now, of course, they're going to be dealing with limited information. They're not going to know what we know now. We learned yesterday it was 75, almost 80 years before we learned that the sinking of the USS Maine was a false flag. There are lots of people in America, probably half the population, that still believe whatever the media tells them, still don't question, and certainly don't believe they're being propagandized. So you're always in this position where you're making decisions with an incomplete set of facts. Uh, this is why the study of history is so important, because we are never privy to all the facts. But if you understand what has happened before, you can better ascertain what those facts are without waiting to be told what they are. You don't have to wait for them to be discovered 75 years later, which incidentally is a lifetime, right? I think that's the point of delay, is to be able to continue to carry out these practices using the same methods over and over and over again, because people are just generally ignorant of history. So um, today we're going to look at the American people's response, where they're going to have a chance through an election to cast votes on whether this new ideology of going forth into the world and conquering foreign territories is something that we want to be involved in. In other words, are we going to be an imperialist nation, a colonizing nation, or not? Remember, for a good chunk of our existence up to that point, most of it actually, we've been an isolationist country based on the tradition and the advice of our first president. Don't get entangled in foreign problems. And now we find ourselves involved in a foreign war, and there's going to be a chance for a referendum on this at the ballot box. The American people are going to get to speak. So it'd be interesting to see what the American people decide. And of course, an election sort of codifies it. If the American people bless it, then it's going to happen again and again and again. If they don't, then there's a chance to go back. So let's see what we see here. We left off the rallying cry, remember the Maine, was sufficient to get the American people behind a war effort. So on April 19th, 1898, Congress declares war on Spain, and we are now involved in our first foreign war. I want to speak briefly about Cuba, because the Cubans were smart. They paid attention to what the United States had done in Hawaii, and they recognized they had a lot of similar traits uh, as Hawaii with respect to the United States. It was close in proximity, and it had a tropical climate which supported the sugarcane industry, just like Hawaii. Now, they've just watched Americans steal Hawaii, using the Marines to go in and overthrow Queen Lily. And now Hawaii is run by Sanford Dole, one of these power elites. And some folks in the Cuban government or in the Cuban population suspected that the Spanish-American War was a backdoor effort by the United States to do the same thing in Cuba they did in Hawaii. And so they demanded, in exchange for their support of American support in this war against Spain, that they wanted in writing an amendment of an amendment that stipulates that after the war is over, should they win, should the United States be successful, should Cuba be successful in freeing itself from Spain with the United States' help, that the United States will not annex Cuba the way it did Hawaii. They want it in writing before the fact. And this is called the Teller Amendment. I think this speaks loudly, though the American people might not be suspicious about what its own government is up to. other people groups, other countries, especially in our hemisphere, are very suspicious about what the Americans are up to and want to cover themselves in the event the circumstances turn out similar to Hawaii so that they don't end up being a colony or an annexed territory later to become a state, just like Hawaii did. So I think this, again, it speaks loudly uh, about what the rest of the world thinks the Americans are up to. I won't get into the Spanish-American War in too much depth. Uh, that's sort of a different topic, but I do want to talk about how this war spread to include the Philippines. So far, we really haven't even mentioned the Philippines, but it is one of Spain's colonies. And as such, we began targeting all of Spain's colonies in this effort. It's not just about Cuba anymore, because we see opportunity here. If we can fight on, the Filipinos don't like being under the thumb of the Spaniards either. So what if we went and helped the Filipinos in their independence movement? In addition to the Cubans, when this is all over, I can see what the thought process that is going on inside these leaders' heads is all those colonies will cease to be colonies of Spain. They'll now be under our domain. They'll be in our domain. They'll be part of our empire instantly. So here's a chance to steal Spain's colonies. Remember now, social Darwinism. You're either going to kill or be killed. You're going to conquer or be conquered. If you sit on the sidelines, you will become the next target. That's the idea. And it doesn't matter about any of these indigenous peoples. None of that. That's the public interest. Nobody gives a fat flying fig about the public interest of these indigenous peoples. It's about the goodies. And Spain has some goodies that we would like to get our hands on. We're late to this colonization game. We're late to the imperialist game. There is no unclaimed territory, at least not very much out there, at least not any valuable. So we're going to have to steal from others. So this is where the Filipinos enter the equation. And of course, as a matter of strategy, it made sense. The Spaniards think our attack's going to happen in Cuba, 90 miles off our shore. What if we went and attacked them in the Philippines first, where their defenses are probably pretty light, surprise them, and then come back, double back, and come back later and take Cuba? So it becomes a strategic thing. And it just so happens the Philippines want their independence from Spain just as badly as the Cubans do. So there's a market for our help. So our Commodore George Dewey sails into Manila Bay. The Spanish are caught unprepared. They're thinking we're going to come into Cuba instead. Obviously, this is before the days of radar and sonar and all that. And we were able to go clear across the Pacific Ocean and catch them by surprise in Manila. The George Washington, so to speak, of the Philippines was this guy. His name is Emilio Aguinaldo. And we show up, and he's been leading this independence movement against Spain for all these years. And of course, they've been failing time and time again. And now with the U.S. help, they have a chance of success. It's very similar to George Washington fighting the British, and we're coming up short time and time again. And then the French sail into Yorktown and surprise the British. And Washington's there on the land. The French are out in the harbor. We catch Cornwallis in a trap. They surrender. And it all happened so fast with the help of the French. The Americans succeeded in their independence movement. We're sort of replicating that strategy. The Americans this time are in the naval forces out in the water. Emilio Aguinaldo's land forces with his nationalists. And so they win this big victory over the Spanish. And it's all hats and horns. The Philippines, later 15,000 U.S. troops joined the cause. And in the surrender, the Spanish don't surrender to the Filipinos, they surrender to the United States. This might seem like a small issue, a small matter, but this is a huge detail, because now lost in this celebration of the Filipinos getting their independence from the Spanish. In fact, the Spanish didn't surrender to the Filipinos. The Spanish surrendered to the Americans. That's going to be a big problem going forward when the Filipinos wake up one day and realize they've just traded one master for another, which was exactly our strategy. It worked out exactly the way we wanted it. That's not going to go over well. All right, so then what happens in Cuba in the meanwhile? We're fighting the Spanish down there with a small contingent of forces, and we're having all kinds of problems. Remember, this is our first foreign war. We don't have any experience logistically with fighting a foreign war. For example, just supplying the front lines. It's only 90 miles. You'd think it'd be pretty easy, but we're having trouble. The wait time, the food that is arriving on the front lines for the soldiers is contaminated. It's been sitting in delivery vehicles too long, ships, whatever, trains, and it's rotten. And a bunch of U.S. troops, get sick. Some of them die from the food. Uh, then the tropical temperatures with the mosquitoes and the disease, malaria, etc. We had more soldiers dying of disease than were dying from battle. Estimate of the 3,000 troops who died in Cuba total, which wasn't very many, but 2,700 of them died from disease. The weaponry is left over from the Civil War, and we haven't fought since then, and we don't really have a military industrial complex yet that steadily supplies us with the new weaponry. So we're just using leftover, and of course it's obsolete by this point, and we're finding out in battle in real time just how obsolete our weapons are. We're fighting in these wool uniforms and these tropical temperatures. I mean, my God, you talk about a miscalculation. So for a number of reasons, mostly logistically, because it is our first foreign war, the fighting is not going well. And it's embarrassing, you know. And so this is where Teddy Roosevelt enters into the equation. I do a series of lectures on Teddy Roosevelt. It's just interesting. You look at his background. He never really stayed in any one job very long. He didn't let the ground dry up under his feet. He was always moving on, looking for this new adventure. He would always succeed at his jobs in these wildly disparate endeavors. Like one time he's a police commissioner in New York City. Another time he's a cattle rancher out west. And then he's the undersecretary of the U.S. Navy. He's never been in the Navy before. He got a reputation as being a problem solver. So these big enterprises would come calling. Of course, he was from New York, very prominent family, very well educated, and he just knew how to get things done. And so these enterprises would come calling and say, listen, we know you've never done this before, but you're a leader of men and we need help. We're failing. And he's down there in the basement of a building in Washington, acting as the undersecretary of the Navy, watching this war effort in Cuba go badly, and it's driving him nuts. So he quits his job and he goes and he recruits his buddies from out west and helped him ranch, and he says, let's put together a cavalry unit. Let's go over to Cuba and let's get her done, so to speak. So they call themselves the Rough Riders. And they go over to Cuba and they start winning these battles. And these Spanish soldiers are looking around. Who are we fighting? These aren't even U.S. troops. Who are these free agents that just showed up on the scene? They're using horses, and they won the Battle of San Juan and Kettle, and all the news that had been coming back to the Americans prior to Teddy Roosevelt getting involved was that we were losing and all these frustrating logistical issues. And now all of a sudden Teddy goes over and now we're winning. And the Spanish, who have already surrendered the Philippines, look around, they see that the U.S. doesn't have to, the forces are going to come, all of them are going to come to bear here shortly in Cuba because the Philippines have been conquered. And they realize we can't even beat Teddy Roosevelt and his little band of merry men. So they surrendered after losing Guantanamo Bay and Santiago Harbor, which were really important, pivotal locations on the island of Cuba. So pretty quickly after Teddy joins the war effort on sort of on his own, leading himself, doing his own thing, the Americans win the war. And relatively speaking, when you compare it to, say, our Civil War, this was, in the words of several prominent American politicians, a quote, splendid little war. We hardly lost anybody in the Philippines. We only lost 3,000 soldiers in Cuba. It was a quick, easy victory. We had few casualties. And look what we get as a result. The Treaty of Paris, the settlement between us and Spain, all of the colonial holdings that Spain used to have now belong to us. That's Cuba, that's Puerto Rico, that's Guam, and that's the Philippines. And in exchange, we give them $20 million. And we just got, if you look at that map, we got goodies spread out all over the world, right? The Philippines clear over in Asia, which is, think about the point of imperialism. You want raw materials. Well, we've already established that Cuba is home to the sugar industry, 90 miles off our coast. Imagine what we can get from the Philippines and Guam, Puerto Rico, et cetera, et cetera. A second point of imperialism is expanded markets. You know, we got into this to be able to sell our stuff to the Cubans. Now we can sell our stuff to the Filipinos as well. The third factor is the well, let's say it was raw materials and markets. It was foreign. It was a place to put a military base because we foresee in the future this colonization effort on our part, this imperialist drive by the Americans to continue. And we're going to need land for bases, military bases, so we can keep control of and monitor all of these land holdings we've got spread out all over the world. Guantanamo ends up being one of our biggest bases in the world, still there to this day in Cuba. And of course, we had this enormous naval base in the Philippines as well, which helps us keep tabs on what's going on in Asia. So these are all fitting nice, and it's a perfect fit, right, within the dreams and the aspirations and the goals of imperialism. It gives us an expanded frontier when we've run out of our own. And so as far as social Darwinism is concerned, we are now one of the conquerors. Instead of being one of the conquered, or potentially one of the conquered, we are now the conquerors. And we are taking from other colonial empires and accumulating for ourselves. And the indigenous peoples be damned. We don't care. The public interest is not what matters here. It's about maximizing profits. It's about taking or being taken. And we are now the taking. You know, we're part of we're one of the takers now. So we are in the club, so to speak. We've become part of the club, whereas for a long time we were out of the club. So I said that this was going to come down to the American people and an election. I'm going to shrink my picture here because it becomes a controversial topic back home in America as an election approaches as to what kind of country are we becoming. You know, we were ourselves a colony one time of the British Empire. We didn't like it. And we wrote this Constitution. Well, first of all, we wrote a Declaration of Independence, talk about how all men are created equal. And this imperialist bent that we are currently on does not treat all men as created equal. It ascribes to social Darwinism, divides the world between fit and unfit. It very decidedly does not treat all men as created equal. So we're violating one of our own norms, right? And then we wrote a constitution, and you know, we created this constitutional government, and the whole point of this experiment, this American experiment, was to govern ourselves and to utilize popular sovereignty, democracy, and all these principles that we say we hold up in front of the world and say, follow us, follow our example. And here we are acting just like all these other imperialist countries. And so you have a split in our country between the anti-imperialists and the imperialists. This is a traditional, and it's always this way in America, you always have two sides to every coin, federalists versus anti-federalists, right? Now it's imperialists versus anti-imperialists. And the anti-imperialists are condemning American imperialism, saying, quote, it's a crime against the very principles of our government, like I just went through. And William Jennings Bryan was one of the primary spokespersons for this movement, as was Mark Twain. Andrew Carnegie was involved in this. These are folks that are saying, hey, everybody, look, we're becoming everything we said we opposed. We're becoming that behemoth, that imperialist monster that we opposed in the war for independence. Now we're becoming that if we're not careful. And of course, on the other side, you got the imperialists who are saying, hey, it's all about social Darwinism. If we give up our holdings that we just won through this war, Philippines, Cuba, somebody else going to take, might as well be us. And of course, you got the president who led us through this war, William McKinley, and Teddy Roosevelt, who later becomes his vice president, right? I told you he comes home from Cuba, a war hero, and he eventually ascends to the vice presidency. And eventually the presidency, when McKinley gets himself assassinated. So you have the government saying this is good. You have these folks outside the government saying this is bad. The country is split between imperialists and anti-imperialists. And what it's going to come down to is the American people in this election, because the candidates are going to fall in line with these two dogmas. William McKinley is running for re-elect, and he is decidedly an imperialist, as is his vice president. And William Jennings Bryan, the Democrat candidate, is an anti-imperialist, and he's the opponent. So, sometimes you get these elections where you have a very clear divide. The American people can go to the ballot booth understanding very well in advance that their vote is going to help determine the direction of our country in a very real and tangible way. Are we going to continue this imperialist direction, looking for other goodies out there, looking to expand our empire around the world? Or are we going to go back to the traditional America as established by the United States, or by George Washington and the founding fathers? And like William Jennings Bryan said, the founding principles of our government. Well, you see the results here. It's like a 2-to-1 vote, electoral college. McKinley wins easily. And that means the Republican Party is in charge. The real winner, though, is imperialism, because this puts the stamp of legitimacy, the stamp of approval of the American people on this war we just came out of, the Spanish-American War, and establishes a precedent going forward that we can do this again. This war is so key to understanding how these power elites operate. They deceived the American people into the war. They committed treason against the American people by launching a false flag on our own ship, killing our own people, to enrage the American people sufficiently to get the support behind the war. Then we go in, we win the war quickly with very few casualties. And as a result, we get all these goodies. Now, in the immediate aftermath of that, it's hard to blame the American people for being supportive of that. It looked like a success all the way around. What the American people did not know is that they had been the victim of a hoax. And that if we knew that that war was engineered by these power elites pulling the strings, it was all about getting the natural resources and the raw materials of Cuba. It's all about getting the colony holdings of Spain. It's about so that they can produce their whatever it is that they make cheaper and more of it, and have a steady supply of these raw materials and have access to these markets. All about money. It's all about money. It's all it's about. If the American people knew that the wool had been pulled over their eyes, then instead of waiting 75 years later to find it, as a result of church hearings, and finding out that the USS Maine was really a false flag attack, they might have felt differently. Most likely they would have felt differently. But again, what these power elites know is that if you can delay, this becomes a tactic, a strategy, a method that's used over and over and over and over. Documents can't be released for 60 years, right? How many times have we seen that? Documents have to be classified under seal for 60 years. That's a lifetime. By the time the American people find out the truth, we've moved on, and we've probably replicated that same thing 5 or 6 more times in the interim. And now it's like a ball rolling downhill, gaining steam. The momentum is too great. You can't stop it. In fact, you're viewed as a crackpot or a conspiracy theorist if you call attention to it. So by delaying for all these years, the recent release of those documents that exposed these power elites for doing what they did, committing treason against the American people, they essentially got permission by the American people. This is why I maintain that since John F. Kennedy's assassination, we have not had a legitimate election since. Because you can't count as a legitimate an election where the American people are deceived and they don't have the facts. Of course, they're going to vote a certain way, given the facts on the ground at the time, but they might vote a different way if they knew the truth. But the truth is always delayed. Truth delayed is truth denied. And when you're operating out of falsehoods, you're voting based on a lie. You're being deceived. You're being these traitors are behind the scenes pulling the strings, and it's not their boys being called up to go serve in these wars. It's not their families at risk. It's not their wealth at risk. It's yours. It's your tax dollars going to use. Remember, they've immunized themselves. So it's your tax dollars going to finance all this. It's your boys going to be drafted. So it wants an overthrow of a government, which is what the assassination of JFK in 63 was. Once that happens and then the truth is delayed or denied to the American people, they don't have the facts to understand that the next president, LBJ, was put there as part of the conspiracy to get rid of the previous one. And then all succeeding presidents after that are part of this lie, this cover up. And until the American people know the truth, they don't really, one day when they do learn the truth, they're going to look back and realize, oh my God, we elected all these guys to president that were involved in the conspiracy. They were involved in this in some manner, shape, form. And we were voting out of ignorance. And in some cases, it's willful ignorance, right? How many people out there still don't believe, even though the facts are glaringly apparent, that Lee Harvey Oswald had nothing to do with the assassination of JFK? How many people out there still believe it? A lot. It's willful ignorance. So anyway, this is the result of the Spanish-American War. Is the American people in the election of 1900 put their stamp of approval on it, their blessing. And now, going forward, you're going to see a mad dash by the government who feels empowered. They have the American people's blessings. They have a mandate now to go forth and conquer. And that's why this war, more so than any other, it sets the stage for this whole, what they call the American century, the next century. I mean, it was 1900s launching us into the 20th century, and no country on earth is going to conquer and spread its influence around the globe like America during the American century, 20th century. It's all because of the Spanish-American War, the lies, the propaganda that got the American people to support this war, and then the false flag, which was the final nail in the coffin, and then the election of 1900, which was based on all those lies, based on all that propaganda, based on that false flag and the outcomes of that war, set in motion a new America intent on creating an empire around the world. And it's all instigated by these power elites who, remember, are operating not by public interest, but by maximizing profits. They get in trouble if they try to take into consideration public interest. They get fired for cause. They've immunized themselves as far as any civil liability. They've immunized their company by spreading their profits around so they don't have to pay taxes. They create all these subsidiaries to hide their assets. They've completely immunized themselves personally and corporately. They're behind the scenes like Geppetto pulling the strings. They set their sights on Hawaii. They take it. They put one of their own in charge. They set their sights on Cuba, but Spain's a problem. So now we got to get the American people to support this war, take out Spain. Now we got Cuba. Now you say, well, what about the Teller Amendment? I thought they couldn't. Well, yes, we can't annex Cuba technically, but that doesn't mean we can't exercise sovereignty over Cuba because it's in our hemisphere. And you'll see how we get around. We created a loophole in the Teller Amendment the Cubans didn't catch, and in essence, put Cuba under our thumb. And of course, we maintained a big base there in Guantanamo. So these power elites, and of course, they support the government, right, with their campaign donations. All these politicians work at the good grace, under the good graces of these power elites, these 50 or 60 men that control these corporations, that control the U.S. economy, and by virtue of both, control the U.S. government from the outside looking in. Now, at some point, when we get past the world wars, they'll be on the inside looking out. Right now, they're on the outside looking in, using their money to control. At some point, they'll have their hands on the levers of power. So we're on a mission to follow this trajectory. It all started after the Civil War with the rise of corporations, the passing of the Ultra-Virus Act, and the creation of these monstrous companies that became unbelievably powerful, unbelievably rich. And the same 50 or 60 people are running all across the country, and they're running everything. And they're making decisions about your boys, their lives, what they're worth, your money, your tax dollars, what it's worth, and you have no say in it. I have no say in it. The American people think they have a say in it when it comes to an election. Turns out they were lied to. And it's a psyop. It's a psyop. The government, later the CIA, uses these known facts about the psychology of humans and uses it to their advantage as leverage to get what they want. And later they point back, they've got plausible deniability. Hey, you voted in 1900. You voted for this. It's the ultimate plausible deniability. You gave us the keys to this. You gave us this power. So, okay, that's it for today. Please subscribe to my channel, smash the like button, share, comment, whichever. And until next time, God bless. Thank you.